Okay, so welcome everyone to today's webinar on hybrid working. Just want to introduce myself first. My name is Holly Bateson, and we also have Jessica Wallace here today too. We're both HR consultants for Moore Kingston Smith HR Consultancy, and some of you may be really familiar with Moore Kingston Smith already from our other services, but we're just another arm to the business providing HR guidance and advice for our clients. We work really closely with a number of not-for-profit organisations, and I can see some of you have signed up today, but there's also lots of organisations we haven't worked with before, so welcome. As you are aware, we're here to discuss today hybrid working and what that might mean for your organisations. Lots of our clients have been implementing hybrid working, so we thought it would be a really beneficial topic to discuss today, as it's like really relevant and at the forefront of everyone's mind. If you do have any questions throughout today's webinar, please write them in the Q&A box so we can capture them and answer them at the end. If you put them in the chat, there just might be a chance that they get missed. So we're just asking if you put them in the Q&A box. Okay. So first of all, we thought it'd be useful to look at exactly what hybrid working is replacing in order to understand what it is and historically what it's meant to work flexibly. So there used to be the following options: flexible working, which was where an employee makes a formal request in writing to permanently alter their working hours, days, pattern, or their working location. And this is usually a contractual change, updating their terms and conditions accordingly. There's agile working, which is when an employer encourages its people to work where, when, and how they choose. Home working, an employee solely carries out their role from their own home, and this is usually reflected within their contract as their main working location. Or remote working, where an employee carries out their role from a relocation or locations of their choice. And that could be from their own home, it could be from different clients' offices, it could be from a WeWork, for example. But hybrid working is basically just a combination of all of these options. It's very unlikely that hybrid working really would have developed, especially so quickly, had it not been for the surprisingly effective remote working periods that were enforced last year and earlier this year. We just want to do a little poll first of all to kind of understand kind of what complications you envisage while implementing new hybrid working structure within your organisation. So we're just going to launch this poll quickly. Hopefully you can see that. So if you want to kind of put in what you think might be, you envisage maybe being your biggest complication. Coming through now. Jess, can you see these as well?
Yeah, I can see them coming up. So we've got almost all respondents.
Okay, great. So what's coming out as kind of the main complication from what I can see is lack of team dynamics and spirit, which yeah, I mean, is a physical barrier, not being in the office together, and it's definitely going to be a challenge that employers are facing, trying to keep up kind of social interaction between kind of colleagues, which hopefully we'll kind of address today as well. 24, lack of learning on the job, learning by osmosis. Yeah, exactly. That's one thing that's really hard to replicate when you're working from home, or everybody's working remotely and not in the office at the same time. And that was one big benefit. And so, yeah, it's definitely something that needs to be considered moving forward. Okay, great.
I think with learning by osmosis as well, there's actually a chance to spin that into a positive. So there might be a few questions about that at the end that we can probably cover off.
Okay. I think you can see those results now. Okay, great. So thought it'd be really interesting to look at some different statistics because things looked really different before the pandemic in regards to the way that we work. 1 year ago, well, 1 year on from the first lockdown, 60% of us have remained working from home. 26% of us plan to continue working from home either permanently or occasionally moving forward. Prior to the 2020 lockdowns, only 6% of these people worked from home for their main job. And 10 years ago, only 884,000 people in the whole of the UK worked from home, which is obviously going to look very different moving forward. But I think it's really important that we look at the past of flexible working requests and kind of why things have moved so much. So historically, employees had to raise formal flexible working requests in order to achieve a more flexible working approach, which to date has been really restrictive. 6% might seem like a really small percentage, but prior to 2014, flexible working requests were actually only available to those with children under the age of 5. And I think this really highlights how rapidly things have changed. So in the past 6 to 7 years, things have gone from being really restrictive, and now 60% of those that could work from home have remained doing so, which is massive. This isn't a natural progression. It would take much longer than 6 or 7 years for this to kind of have such an impact on the way lots of people are working, and lots of employers are now having to play catch up, such as training their managers to manage people remotely, implementing new processes, health and safety, kind of etc. But even now, current legislation or employment legislation sets out that employees must have 26 weeks continuous service in order to make a request to work flexibly, and that can only make one request every 12 months. Even for those who are eligible to submit a flexible working request, there is actually no guarantee that it will be accepted. And there is a number of valid reasons a business can rely on to reject flexible working requests. Hybrid working is therefore likely to be one of the biggest impacts on flexible working that UK workers have seen in a really long time. The implementation of any kind of new hybrid working structure will need some careful planning. You could implement, and some people have been implementing hybrid working structures by just issuing one standalone policy, but that may not provide you the rollout, the smooth rollout that you want. To ensure that hybrid working is successfully rolled out, you may want to think about lots of different areas in order for it to go as best as possible. So employers will need to plan carefully, tailor their plans to ensure that they consider not only what's relevant to the business, as well as what's best for their people. Given the scale of the change, there may be many areas for consideration that employers tend to miss, but that will be key to helping them shape their new personalised hybrid working plans. So things to consider are going to be staff consultation and updating employee terms and conditions. So some changes that you may look to make within your organisation may actually be contractual changes and may need to be updated in their contracts and addendums. They may be custom and practice within your organisation for a long period of time, and therefore you may need to formally consult with staff and get their agreement before making any permanent changes to their terms and conditions. That's kind of quite a formal process, but it definitely needs to be considered, whereas gaining staff input and feedback, I think in any time any change is being implemented, it's really important to gather an understanding of what employees want, especially from the way they've been working to a new way of working and the kind of the impact of the pandemic. Understanding what they want, what they expect, and kind of getting them involved in any proposed changes will really help secure buy-in. Others to think about is health and safety and DSE. Have you done the risk assessments you need to do for home workers? Are you doing your due diligence as an employer? Employee wellbeing and updating your current plan accordingly. Wellbeing obviously has been on the agenda for a number of years, but has really gained a lot of focus, and that's been sped up as well by the pandemic, which impacted employee wellbeing in so many different ways, whether that be financial, physical, mental, social, spiritual, and it all needs to be considered within this plan. Training and employee development, like on the poll, how will employees still receive opportunities for learning and development if they're not in the office? Management, are leaders and managers in your organisation equipped to manage staff remotely? And maintaining employee engagement, if everybody is going to be on different schedules and not all in the same place at the same time, how is everyone going to remain connected to the organisation and their fellow colleagues? And then of course, there's always remaining compliant. So prevention is key. Preventing any potential issues before they arise will be another key factor in the successful implementation of hybrid working. Therefore, it will be important to plan carefully in advance of launching any new plan with your team, ensuring that you are tailoring your new working structure to your organisation. There isn't a one size fits all, so really needs to be like, what is the work that you carry out? What are your people like, and how is that going to fit together? Considering any pitfalls, especially if there were any identified early on during 2020 and 2021 lockdowns, what didn't go so well and why, and how can this be resolved moving forwards? I think it's really important to have some really honest reflections here and gather feedback from employees in order to kind of make some positive change and ensure that any new structure is going to be successful. So yeah, talking to your staff, getting staff input and feedback will ensure you gain employee buy-in before implementing any permanent changes, which in turn can be key to your new hybrid structure being successful. If the new structure is kind of put together to accommodate employee input and feedback during the planning stage, then it's much less likely that you're going to get complaints or concerns raised after the launch, which we really want to avoid. And we're always recommending, and I've spoken about it already, recommending that you update your management's team training. So updated training for your whole management team can ensure that not only are they familiar with the new working structure, so they feel confident if people are going to ask them questions, kind of manage their own expectations on this, but will also ensure that their management skills and style are brought in line with how effectively to manage and support their teams remotely. And this change in management style could be really crucial to reducing the risk of employees feeling micromanaged or isolated while working from home. So me and Jess kind of thought about how we could kind of go through this with you and how it would be beneficial. And, you know, as HR consultants, we receive lots of queries from our clients, and we've compiled kind of some of the top queries that have come through when they've been implementing hybrid working structures. So we thought it'd be useful to kind of talk to you through the questions that they've brought forward to us and the kind of answers and solutions we've helped to provide. So the first question was, we have a split workforce where some employees can work from home while others have to be physically present at work to carry out their role. This divide appears to be causing issues of resentment from those who are required to attend the workplace. Is there anything that I can do to remove this divide and resentment? Well, resentment is likely in this scenario, as those who have to remain physically present in the workplace are likely to feel like those who are able to work from home are kind of receiving preferential treatment. And this can be like the start of an us and them scenario if there isn't one to begin with already. To reduce both the resentment and the divide, employers could look at what perks they can offer to those who are required to come into the workplace instead of home working. Can these employees be offered agile working? Could they possibly have more of a say on or flexibility over their working hours? I think it's really important at this point to gather feedback on frustrations each group of employees have over the impact of home working, and would be helpful in implementing any new hybrid structure moving forward. We recently worked with a client where communication between the group that were working from home and the group that were having to come to work, where the communication had really suffered throughout lockdowns and them working apart. And it wasn't that the people who were having to go to work were resenting anybody else, but they were just finding communication between the two parties had really changed. They were just able to go into the office before and have quick communication, and now they were finding it harder to make communication with people who are working from home, and this was causing a lot of frustration. So it doesn't always have to be resentment. It could just be working out, why isn't this working? Why are you feeling frustrated? Why are you feeling resentful? And working with employees to understand kind of if there's any changes that could be made. Yes.
So another one that we've had to come up quite often from our clients is when they were working in the office together, they had a very close-knit team, but since everyone's been working remotely, that seems to have dropped off slightly and communication has dropped. So a big question is, how do you get that back? So I think the main thing here is looking at the key differences, exactly what worked well when you were working in the office compared to what is now not working so well from home. So it could be something really, really small and simple. It could be that communication has just dropped off slightly. If you think about what it's like when you're working in the office, people have very spontaneous chats throughout the day with their colleagues that they're sat near. So you could fix this really simply by just arranging daily team catch-ups, small meetings in the morning, just so that you're maintaining that regular interaction you had while you were in the office. So it could be something like a 10 or 15-minute meeting where you just talk about the work you've got for the day, if there's any queries or problems that they foresee in their working day. Again, similarly, it could be something like a lack of spontaneous social interaction. So even at this stage, it could be something that you could fix virtually. So you could arrange things like quizzes or games to do over Zoom or Teams. Again, only half an hour every week or so, just something small to maintain that interaction that focuses on something that's not just work. Another thing you could do is just arrange collaboration days. So if you're looking to implement hybrid working and you're noticing that a lot of employees are choosing to work from home more often than they are in the office, you can set mandatory collaboration days where the whole team come in together, and in that sense then you're still getting the team together to maintain those social dynamics. And another important thing I think is that managers should be seen to lead by example. So if managers are setting the example that they're only speaking to their employees or colleagues when it's work related, then employees working from home are likely to follow in those footsteps and maybe feel guilty about calling their colleagues for a chat or a catch up. So if you lead by example and really try and promote having things like virtual cuppers and calling colleagues for a catch up every now and again, so long as it's reasonable, then employees are much more likely to feel comfortable in doing so and maintain that social dynamic.
Great. Okay, so the third question is, I feel that while managing remotely, there are some people in the team pulling their weight more than others, and I find this difficult to monitor while not being physically present. What are your tips for effectively monitoring productivity remotely? So, I mean, when it comes to managing remotely, you can easily fall into kind of micromanagement, which can have a really negative impact on working relationships. As with a lot of things in life, communication is key. Lots of platforms for two-way communication, not just times for you to like give feedback to an employee, but for them to talk to you and give their feedback. So it's about being as approachable as possible, building relationships with them. One-to-ones seem like a small thing, but really important to ensure that you have one-to-ones in place. Employees don't always feel totally comfortable to have conversations always in a group setting, and you may kind of gather an understanding of maybe work they're struggling with or kind of any challenges they have within their day. I think, like Jess just said, leading by example, having calls with them, not always just about work, but social conversation, building rapport with them, building that relationship so that they feel like they can call you if they're having kind of any problems or issues, and understanding what's going on with them, not just professionally, but personally too. Measuring outputs rather than what they're doing every single minute of the day. So even when employees are in the office, I mean, they could be looking like they're busy, but searching for kind of new houses or shopping, etc. So it's not as important to know what they're doing, but it's important to know kind of what the output is. And if you do have any concerns over kind of any employees kind of monitoring or have any concerns over what they're doing or whether they're being that productive, you can set kind of short-term goals for them to kind of manage their productivity and understand their capability. But ultimately, this is all built on trust. And obviously, employers have had to have a lot of trust over the past 2 years, but you really need to rely on these employees and build that trust. And that all starts with building a relationship and having really strong communication.
So another one we've had come up a few times are employees that are refusing to turn on their video camera during team meetings. Despite the rest of the team obviously having theirs on, managers seem to find this makes communication with the team quite difficult or with that individual difficult, and they don't know how to address that matter or necessarily what they can actually ask employees to do while they're working from home. So the key thing here would be to manage this type of issue exactly how you would if you were managing an issue like that in the office environment. So addressing it sensitively and try and understand exactly what the individual's concerns are and what their circumstances are. So it's important to remember it's not necessarily that individual being awkward. It's not always going to be a conduct matter. It could be something really simple like them being embarrassed about their home environment and not actually wanting to share that with the rest of their colleagues. So in that kind of scenario, the best thing to do would be just to have a really informal, open and honest conversation with them, try and reassure them that there are options. And obviously with tech at the moment, there are options available to them. They can blur their backgrounds or set different backgrounds over Teams or Zoom. And it could be something as simple as that. Obviously, if it is a conduct matter and it is something like the colleague just not wanting to join in and with meetings and just being awkward, then we can address that separately, and you can always get in touch with us.
Sorry. Okay, so question 5. Now that we have some employees choosing to return to the office and some still working from home, I'm worried that the cliques will form within the team. How do I resolve this and stop a divide happening? So I think Jess has mentioned some of these kind of things today, but looking to organise set collaboration days, whether that's mandatory or not, but where the whole team is required, or you're asking them to go into the office on the same day. It doesn't have to be that often. We do it within our team once a month. But it's a good opportunity to bring everybody together. This will help with team dynamics and spirit going forward, and ensures that the whole team is still communicating with each other and not just those that they choose to do. If you have regular team meetings in your diary, you could look to make these face-to-face to maintain team social interaction. And, like the previous question, making sure everyone has their video on so everyone can see each other and communicate, and encouraging that as much as possible. Additionally, if employees are due to be in the same meeting, promote them booking a meeting or a boardroom together. Sorry, if they're going to be in the same office or the same day or whatever, booking a meeting or boardroom together within the office so that you can build that face-to-face interaction and maintain working relationships. And if face-to-face collaboration days or meetings aren't happening often, try and plan just social events so that the team continue to build and interact as they would before. So it can either be more professionally, it can be personally, or it can be both. Yeah. 6.
So one of the key things queries that we get is obviously, what should the hybrid working structure look like? As the employer, should you be setting the amount of days that employees are working from home, or should it be more flexible? So I think the key thing here to understand is that there is definitely no one size fits all, and hybrid working is going to look different for every different company, business. So it really depends on your needs and the nature of the work that you're doing. So if the majority of your employees need to spend a significant time physically present in the office environment in order to be able to actually carry out their work, then you are more likely want to go into set up a really structured hybrid working. So for example, a common theme here seems to be like 2 to 3 ratio, so 2 days from home each week and 3 days in the office each week. Again, you can set which days that you actually need employees to be in the office. On the flip side of things, if the majority of your employees have a really flexible workload, then you don't need to actually set a pattern. You can leave it to employee discretion and let them pick and choose when they're coming into the office and effectively managing their own time. So some employers actually choose to set expectations only. So for example, they may issue some type of communication that says we just want employees to try their best to come to the office maybe 1 or 2 days per week just to maintain relationships and social interaction. But with that option, again, it's still largely putting the flexibility in the employee's hands. So there's a huge number of options with it. As I say, there's no one size fits all, and everyone's hybrid structure will look different. But I think, as Holly mentioned earlier on, it's a really important thing to remember throughout this whole process. And when you're looking to design a hybrid structure, it's so important to actually gain employee feedback and get that buy-in from staff in advance, so that whatever you are going to try and implement, that they've already brought into it, and it's what will work well for them as well.
Okay, so I have an employee who wants to move across the country now that they know they're able to work remotely. Do I have to allow this? Well, you don't have to allow them to do that, but only if you can allow it, if it won't restrict them carrying out their roles. So if they're still able to complete their kind of roles and responsibilities within a different location, then that's great. But if they predominantly work, if they can predominantly work from home or remotely, then this has been proven successful maybe throughout the pandemic or previously before, then you can definitely allow it. You will likely need to make this conditional, though, on the expectation that they are available to attend certain meetings or events. So, for example, that they travel back to the office 1 time per month for a team meeting. If they work remotely without ever attending face-to-face team meetings, it could be that they start to feel quite isolated, especially if everybody else is in the same location. So I think it's important to try and get that expectation in to begin with, unless there isn't a reason that they would need to come into the office ever. An important consideration point would be their performance. So if there have been concerns over this person's productivity, maybe throughout the pandemics or previously before, it's probably not going to get much better if they're able to be away from the office completely, and away from the team and the management, etc. So it might be a consideration that you make before allowing somebody to kind of move to a different part of the country. If they also, we get lots of requests as well about employees wanting to move abroad to different countries, and again, that's not something that you have to allow them to do, even if they can work from home and fulfill most of their role and responsibilities, and they could do that from another country. There might be implications for you as an employer, tax implications, so that's something definitely to really consider before allowing an employee to do that. But it is always an option and it's always available. Okay. Next one is, I need to recruit a new position in the near future. Should I change my recruitment process to allow candidates to interview remotely? If so, how can I ensure that doesn't affect my decisions? I think a lot of employers have had to pick up interviewing remotely over the past year and a half, and unconscious bias is always something that plays a role when it comes to interviews, and always something that hiring managers need to be really mindful of. And kind of what Jess has mentioned already, there's been different types of unconscious bias that have come out through the pandemic, which is Zoom backgrounds. You may have an unconscious bias towards somebody who doesn't have a particularly nice or very messy background, but you could even have one towards people who have a particularly nice one as well. So it's just being mindful of your biases when you're interviewing candidates. It can be quite difficult, to build that rapport with candidates when they're over Zoom. Usually if they're coming into the office and you're face to face, you get that bit of time, like, do you want a coffee? And like, you can have a bit of conversation. Whereas when employees are coming onto the candidates are coming onto the calls now, it can feel like maybe the interview starts immediately. So I think employers just have to work a little bit harder to help build some rapport with that candidate, and kind of just be aware of their biases. Interviews are also an opportunity to showcase the company, and I think it's just important that still comes across within an interview, which usually could be done when you show them around the office and you show them the atmosphere and the working environment. So this time it's going to be kind of on that hiring manager to kind of really sell the company back. But for us, for example, in our team, one of the things that comes out quite a lot is that we really like working together, and if we had a new candidate that joined and they were hired in, then it would be important that they're getting that social time. Otherwise they're less likely to be engaged. If that's the kind of the key part that we're selling to them, then we need to be mindful to implement that afterwards as well. Okay, so these are the kind of questions that have come through to us from clients. So we've kind of gone through these ones with you, but we're open now to kind of answer kind of any questions that you might have. I think a couple have come through already, Jess.
Yeah, so I've seen a few pop up. So from the clients you've worked with, have you seen absences increase when people move to hybrid working? I think what we've found is actually typically it's decreased. And I think if you look at the difference in working, it's so different working in the office to how it is in a hybrid structure. So if you're working 5 days in the office and you think about when you first feel ill, when you wake up in the morning, you feel at your worst in the morning, you've still got to get up, you've still got to get ready, you've got to commute, you've got to spend the whole day away from your home and from home comfort. So I think employees are much more likely to actually call in sick first thing in the morning, because they just at that point don't want to face the day feeling the way they do. But then looking on the other side of it, if you're working from home, or you've got the option to work from home, when you first wake up and feel sick, you're much more likely to at least have a bit more of a lay-in, or open the laptop slightly later than you normally do and just see how you get on with the day. So there's pros and cons with it. As I say, I think it definitely does decrease the amount of absences that employers have seen, particularly after the last year. But it's important to remember the negatives that come alongside it. So obviously if employees do come to the office and they feel sick, then you're there to keep an eye on them and say, that's enough for today, you're obviously not well enough, please go home. If they're at home on their own, there's no one there to really notice it, which could potentially have a negative impact on not only their well-being, but obviously the quality of their work and the output. So I think it's, again, as we've mentioned throughout, just really important to maintain that communication, especially if you know someone's not feeling well. Just remember to keep checking in on them, and remind them that, you know, if they are genuinely sick, they shouldn't actually be working, whether they're at home or not. They should be logging off and taking the time off as genuine sickness.
Great. I can see we've had another question come through. So what action can be taken where senior management staff refuse to come into the office and in fact have moved out of the area? And I think kind of relates to one of the kind of client queries that we had before. Yeah, it doesn't really matter depending on whatever level of staff we're talking about, but if it's a reasonable request that you're asking someone to come into the office and they're not following that, then that absolutely can be considered like a conduct issue. But like Jess said before, you know, it's about exploring with that individual why they're refusing to come into the office. Is there any reasonable adjustments that can be made? What are their concerns? What are their issues? And having that conversation. If they've moved out of the area and haven't told you that that's what they're going to do and are now refusing to come into the office, you know, you can manage that as kind of more of a conduct thing that depends on the policies you have in place. But if that's the only reason they can't come into the office and there was no conversation, then absolutely you can have a more kind of formal conversation with that employee about the decision that they've made. Yeah.
I've seen another one that what was my last suggestion when I was discussing the problem of declining team spirit. Was it about coffee? So yes, it was. It was promoting things like virtual coffees. So, you know, encouraging your team to take a 10-minute break there here. Well, not regularly as such, but within reason every now and again. So if you think about when you're in the office, you're likely to get up and go to the kitchen, meet a colleague in there and stop and have a little bit of a chat. So there's no reason while you're working at home why that shouldn't continue. So if you promote things like virtual cuppers or coffees, or there's quite a few different ways that people have referred to it, it just maintains that flexibility for staff still to have that social interaction.
Great. We've had another question. Appreciating there are no longer government restrictions, but where we have clinically very vulnerable members of staff, do you have any advice on how we should deal with the idea of team meetings in the office where we have restricted space? I think I would follow government guidance as much as possible. If there are no restrictions, but there's still advice from the government about how you should help and support very vulnerable members of staff, then I would definitely follow that initially. But I think, you know, as an employer, you can be as flexible as you possibly can be. And if there are ways that you can do a phased return to work for this employee, maybe they first of all join meetings over Zoom and then they come in. But I think it's about understanding these vulnerable members of staff, their concerns, their issues. What are they worried about? What would make them feel comfortable? Ask them. And if it can be accommodated and it's reasonable, you know, when we say reasonable, it's not going to cost too much. It's not, it's doable within kind of your budget and time, etc. Then absolutely consider that. But I think it's just about listening to the employees and getting them to guide you with what they need in order to feel comfortable. I think, you know, if there isn't any guidance and they can come back to the office and there is very low, there isn't the risk that was posed before, I think, you know, you can help provide like an action plan. What steps are we going to do in order to try and get you back into work as best as possible, so you feel comfortable and we feel comfortable too. And you know, you can always get occupational health involved as well. They're kind of medical professionals who can help advise you and support you best as possible. Their job is to help people with kind of medical issues or very vulnerable people to get back into work full time. So that might be a really good option as well, to kind of speak to them and see what they suggest as well.
So we've had one about how to actually recognise if employees are working from home and they've become disengaged. So there's a few key signs typically. Usually it would be somebody who keeps very quiet during team conversations or team meetings. They're not very likely to include themselves socially if you are arranging any social events at all. They're much less likely to participate in meetings that are about the future of the business or even their employment, and just become less available during the day. Or another typical sign may be that their output and their productivity is dropping off. So it's quite similar again to how it would be in the office. It's just that you'd need to notice it from home. So I think in that sense, it's really important that managers maintain regular one-to-ones and just really keep communication going with employees when they do notice these signs. So having a really structured one-to-one process or PDP process in place will be really important. And it's important to remember as well that a lot of employees, they're retained by having a good team. A key thing to employees is, I want to work here because I love my team, I love my colleagues. So maintaining, again, as we spoke about throughout the webinar so far, just ensuring that we maintain social interaction and team dynamics, that can be a key factor in not getting shock resignations.
Okay, we've had one question that's come through saying, do we have a duty of care to know that an employee is okay whilst working from home, i.e. we've not heard from them during the day? There isn't a duty of care every single day to know, kind of check it if you just haven't heard from them that one day. I think it's really important when you do the risk assessment to outline kind of if there's any kind of cause for concern, and building that relationship with that employee to understand what they're doing that week and where they're working. I think it's just important to have regular check-ins and understand employees' normal working patterns and how they communicate with the company. And when they start to behave in ways that or you see a change in their behavior, that's when I would start to be checking in and listening to what they're saying. If you're meeting with them on a regular basis and they're starting to talk about maybe that they're not feeling great or their well-being's not great, or they're kind of giving you those signs, that's where I think the duty of care comes in as an employer, to check in with that and change the behavior, check in with that employee more regularly. But the best thing you can do as a preventative step is to do that risk assessment first, identify where this employee thinks there could be any risks, talk to them about how they'd like to be communicated with. If it's something that they would like to be spoken to every day, then that's what you do. And then suddenly if they don't want to, what's going on there? But I think it's about having regular communication with them, but I don't think you have to check in them with every single day to be like, are you okay today? Are you okay today?
And we've had another one that is about if you ask for staff input at the beginning stage when you're planning hybrid, and you get a lot of responses that employees would prefer for office days not to be forced, how do you get their buy-in to bring them back into the office? So it's, you may get that, but I think the best thing to remember here is you can still offer a huge degree of flexibility and say, look, your feedback has clearly indicated that you'd all prefer to work from home on a more regular basis than you would being in the office. So we're happy to allow you that degree of flexibility. However, there will be set days where you are going to be requested to come for mandatory collaboration days. I don't think it's reasonable for any employee to just assume that they are going to work from home 100% of the time now. There's always going to be some type of situation when employees are needed back in the office. It could be for team meetings, as we've discussed, keeping up dynamics and social interaction, but there are other things to consider as well. There's going to be training at some point, which is quite often more effective face-to-face. If you think about the slightly more negative side of things, if you have conduct issues, if you need to have disciplinaries or grievance meetings or anything like that, it's best to handle them internally face-to-face rather than doing everything over Zoom or Teams. It's just a bit more personal. So yeah, you can still offer a huge degree of flexibility, but I would always recommend that whatever structure you put in place, it is written into the new terms that there will still be those mandatory days where they are needed in the office. And on the the kind of terms and conditions side of that, I would usually recommend that the location of work does remain as the office, so that employees can't argue that, you know, their sole place of work is now working from home. They'd still have it written into their terms and conditions that they still work from the office as well.
Okay, so that kind of links in with another question we've had, which is, should we have a formal agreement in place about their hybrid working, and can it be withdrawn? And I really think it depends on, if we flick back, it depends on the type of kind of flexible working agreement that you have with that employee. So if you've made a contractual change to their terms and conditions, where that might be that they're only going to work 3 days a week, or changing their hours and their ways of the days that they're working, it can't be withdrawn without a formal consultation. So where you're making contractual changes that are forming part of their employment agreement, they're going to be ones that both the employee and the employer are going to find hard to be changed. If your policies, your handbook forms part of is a contractual handbook, anything that's put into there, yes, you will then have to formally consult on. And so that could be hard to withdraw. But where you've got organisations that it's not contractual, their handbook and their policies, you could create a formal kind of policy about hybrid working, about the expectations as you're setting as a company. And, you know, we think it's one thing that you should definitely consider. I think there's a lot of things as well, but having that policy is a great way of communicating to everybody, setting expectations about you can work from home 3 days a week, or you can pick whatever, but also putting in there that, you know, that your management still has the final say on what days they're going to be, and some people's roles may not allow themselves to work from home, and you can have that all laid out so it's very clear that for both employers and managers exactly how to manage this kind of ways of working. So sometimes it can be withdrawn. I think a lot of clients we've been working with have been putting trial periods in, whether that's 3 months or 6 months. They might be saying, you know, now you can work from home 4 days a week and you come in 1 day if you want to, or you can come in more, and we're going to see how it's going to work. Others are changing their core hours. So we've had another question actually about what are considered core hours. And so some companies are changing their core hours, for example, from 10 to 3, and allowing their employees to have a bit more flexibility so they can start earlier and end earlier. But again, if you're thinking of putting these changes in that you think are going to be helpful, other companies actually have condensed their hours slightly and allowed their teams to take Friday afternoons off. All of these things are being put in as trial periods and non-contractual, and as policies that will be reviewed. And I think when you go in with it saying it's a trial period, you're really giving it an opportunity to see how it's going to land, see how your employees are going to respond to it, and then you're making it very clear that you can withdraw it at any time. So it just depends what flexible working kind of thing you choose to implement, really.
And we've had another one about, should we visit workplaces at home to risk assess? So obviously health and safety falls slightly outside of mine and Holly's remit. However, I would always recommend, when you're looking to implement a hybrid structure, that you do write into it that as the employer, you do reserve the right to visit a home address, especially if you have concerns over whether every single one of your employees actually has a suitable working setup. So it's best to reserve your right to do so. And yeah, I think if you have any huge concerns over risk assessments and people setups in DSE, we can always put you in touch with people internally so that you can get professional health and safety advice.
Okay. We have had a question about, are there any tax considerations? And like I spoke about before, if employees are working remotely and moving to like a different country, there usually are tax considerations then. I know for employees, they can claim back kind of some sort of tax from the government if they're working from home and now having to use their own kind of electricity, etc., whereas before they would be in the office. So I know that employees can kind of get some kind of tax benefit in kind back. But I think we have people within the organisation who definitely can provide a little bit more information within MKS, our tax experts. So I will definitely pass your question over and I can come back to you with a little bit more kind of a thorough answer on that.
Okay, so we've had one as well about how long before a trial period becomes the norm and therefore by default becomes contractual. I think an important thing to remember here is at the moment there's not really a norm, because hybrid working is so new. There's no legislation around it, but yeah, you're completely right to have it in the back of your mind that if you allow it to happen for too long, then it may become a contractual right of the employees. So typically I would recommend between 3 and 6 months. I think a trial period that goes on any longer than 6 months, all employees are going to start assuming that it is a contractual right. So I'd set that as the maximum.
Okay, so we'll do one last question because we're just mindful of the time. Any questions that we've had come through that we haven't answered, then we'll definitely come back to you. I think we have everyone's email address that's signed up, so we'll come back to you. But the last question is, what's your view on workplace monitoring? Most service providers are offering workplace analytics that give a really good insight into staff's availability and productivity. We see a clear divide between staff that are previously home working pre-COVID to those that are now allowed to home work. So this is, I guess, just my opinion. You know, we work within an organization where we complete timesheets, we're client facing, and we bill out a lot of our work. So in terms of organizations that are similar to that, it's not that different to have kind of an insight or analytics on kind of what people are doing on a day-to-day basis. But I know coming from different organization and coming into like as a HR consultant role, it is a bit of a shift to suddenly have to track what you're doing day in, day out through this system. And I think there's an understanding that it's being done because we're ensuring that we're billing out clients correctly, and so it needs to be monitored. But I think if you were to implement that into another organization, into your not-for-profit organization, I think it's really just about kind of how this is communicated, why this is being implemented. And there could be it could seem a little bit like maybe you're wanting to keep track on people, what are they doing? So I think it would all be about the presentation. Why are you implementing this? What's the benefits going to be for the employees and for the business? What challenges is this trying to resolve? I think it needs to have a clear business case as to why you're putting this in order for staff to really kind of buy into it and not just feel like they're being micromanaged and that they're not trusted to work from home productively. But ultimately, I think the analytics that you get from it, I think, are really useful and can give a good insight. But that's only if it's filled in properly and employees don't feel kind of pressured to appear more busy than they are. And yeah, you just don't want it to have a negative impact in organizations that don't necessarily usually have these kind of workplace monitoring systems. Okay, great. So thank you so much for your questions. Really appreciate it. Like we said, if we haven't come back to you, we'll be able to have these questions afterwards, and we'll come back to you directly. These slides will be made available after today's call. So I know there was a few questions that came in about that, and yes, so these will be made available. Really appreciate your time today, and you will receive a feedback form after today's webinar, and it'd be really great if you could complete that, and that'd be really helpful. Let us know what kind of topics you would like to be discussed moving forward, and we can see if we can do that. But thank you so much. Thanks everyone for today.
Thank you.